But we get to this story, and remember that this is not the first time Jesus walks on the water. In the 8th chapter of Matthew and also in Mark, we see that Jesus is walking across the water, and that's when he just blows their mind with this idea that, you mean you are the Son of God? The disciples who are in the presence of Jesus are still surprised when Jesus does something otherworldly, not human. I mean, he speaks and the storm calms. He blesses and multitudes are fed. They're struggling in a boat, trying to keep it afloat and make their way across the lake. And Jesus walks on water. The disciples say it's a ghost. So if we think this morning about the times when you have been afraid, when you have been doing what you're supposed to do, you're engaged, you're participating in whatever activity, and at a certain point you reach that moment of, why am I doing this? You know, what was I thinking when I set out? You know, it's human nature to second guess ourselves. But Jesus says to the disciples, don't be afraid. And that's not something, you know, we like to think we're brave and we're, you know, confident people. But doubt, fear are very human emotions, experiences. And when we pause and express our fear, that's a survival mechanism. That's that moment of, I'm afraid, therefore I need to take action. But the disciples, all they could do was cry out in fear. Now, think about what's happening in that boat. These are people who were raised in a culture where the sea, the deep, was a place of chaos. That's where danger lived. And even the fishermen on the Sea of Galilee didn't cross the lake. They skirted the edge. You know, if they had to go deep, they always were in sight of land. But the idea of, you know, willingly embracing chaos was not something that they would have taken on lightly. So they're in this boat and they're afraid. And Peter, kind of representing all of us, says, if it is you, command me to come out onto the water. And as I was reading that a few months ago, I thought, okay, you're afraid, you think it might be a ghost, and you're saying to the ghost, if it's you, command me to come out. So what was Peter thinking? I mean, you're going to trust a ghost? I mean, other than Casper, most ghosts are not friendly sorts. Peter is either a fool or he has just absolute confidence that even the Spirit of Jesus is capable and powerful and trustworthy. So Jesus offers that invitation, extends, utters that command, come. And Peter, without hesitation, gets out of the boat. And I don't know if you have ever said that first step is a doozy. Well, that's this. He gets out of a boat in the middle of a storm. That's nuts. No rational person would do that. But Peter does. And because he is acting under the auspices, under the direction, the command of Jesus, he is able to replicate what Jesus is doing. He's able to walk on the water. If the story had ended there, we might be worshiping Peter instead of Jesus. But Peter takes his eyes off of Jesus, and he gets distracted by his environment, and he begins to sink. But Peter still keeps a little bit of his wits about him, and he says, "Lord, save me." I mean, that's a prayer that each one of us here this morning, maybe you've already said it this morning in some way. How many times over the course of your life have you said, "Lord, help me. Lord, save me. Lord, I need you." That realization that we should not try to exist outside of God's presence, outside of God's will. So Jesus reaches out, and we are not asked to do heroic things, but sometimes we're commanded to do something that is against our genogram or our Myers-Briggs type, and we're asked to take that step of faith. And maybe this morning you're not being asked to get out of a boat out on, I don't know what the lakes are around here, but maybe it's not a physical boat that you're being asked to get out of. Maybe it's a spiritual boat. Maybe it's a comfort boat. The General Board of Global Ministries is having a virtual mission volunteer webinar in a couple weeks. And they're looking for people who are willing to get out of their comfort zone, willing to get out of their boat and be in service somewhere in the world. It may be here in Colorado, it may be in South America, it may be in Europe. But there are people who are hoping there is someone who will get out of the boat and come to them. Maybe that's not the boat that you're being asked to get out of. Maybe that boat that you're being asked to get out of is to cross the street and say to a neighbor, I've lived here for a while, but we've never spoken. How are you? Maybe that's the boat. We sometimes hear the call to be in service. And we think once we're called and we're sent, we're on our own. But Jesus is with Peter and brings him into the boat. Once they get into the boat, all of the disciples worship Jesus and say, truly you are the Son of God. That's why it's important to read an entire story and not just fixate on a verse or on a portion of a passage, to read it in context, because we need to remember that these accounts of the life of Jesus, well, in fact, the entire Bible, from beginning to end, were written with specific intent. And they were written for communities and people who understood the nuances and the context. They didn't hear what Jesus said as if it were a quote. They heard what Jesus said in relationship to who they were and what they were part of. This idea that Peter offers the disciples and to us is the awareness that we don't have to be perfect to get out of the boat. Jesus asked Peter, why did you not have faith? It's okay if you're not sure, but this morning, I hope that you'll go back and read the entire 14th chapter of Matthew. It's not that long. And find yourself in these stories. Find yourself saying, Lord, call me to join you. And hear what Jesus says to you today. Amen.